Welcome to Carefree and Conscious with me, Susanne Wilson, the Carefree Medium. If you like this kind of content, be sure to like and subscribe and share with a friend. Today on Carefree and Conscious, how to live when you want to die with LeAnn Hull. LeAnn Hull is a mother of four, author, and CEO. LeAnn has written a book called How to Live When You Want to Die, based on her experience of having her young son complete suicide at the age of 16. Andy, LeAnn's son, was known for his incredibly consistent, sunny disposition, and therefore he earned the nickname Sunshine. After he passed, LeAnn founded the Andy Hull Sunshine Foundation to encourage people to understand that everyone matters. You matter. There are several programs that they provide, especially outreach within schools. Go from the dark night of the soul in this interview into the full sunshine of healing, joy, and living in the moment. And now, Carefree and Conscious, how to live when you want to die. LeAnn Hull, welcome to Carefree and Conscious.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Susanne. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, you know, I'm always delighted to see you, and we've known each other since 2012. And
Yes.
I thought it would be interesting to start with how you and I met, because it leads right into how you have become, unhappily to say this, an expert on the spiritual impacts and the impacts on the families when a very dear loved one dies by suicide. So let's start with, how did you meet me?
You know, it was certainly not something that was on my radar screen because I come from an evangelical Christian background. So communicating with a medium or anything like that was a definite no-no. So that it wasn't even something I contemplated when Andy passed. But I had a couple people message me in my inbox and my, Facebook or wherever it was, and they said, you need to go see the Carefree Medium. I'm like, yeah, only if I'm planning on going to hell, I mean, it really it scared me. But that loss, losing my son, everything was on the table, off the table, whatever at that point. So I Googled you and you looked normal. Your background looked normal. You come from it. And I thought, all right, I'm just not going to tell anyone. And I set my first appointment with you just a month after Andy passed.
I realized it was that soon after his passing, but I remember you had somebody do it under a different name, different contact information, different contact information. I feel him here. I can get really tongue-tied when I feel the spirit here, but I feel him like right here, like really, really close. But anyway, being someone who grew up with a religious dogma and being a skeptic, although an open-minded one, I found, you really set it up so that you would know it was real. And I applaud you for doing that. I like for people to do that. How did making that connection inform your next step in your life?
It was, I'm not sure I'd be here had that not happened. I mean, there were many things that helped me along the way, but that was a pivotal moment for me. When I walked in there and sat there with you, I knew without a doubt the things that Andy said were Andy, and there was no disputing that. And he said something at the very end of our session that paved my way forward. And right before we were getting ready to finish up, after I'd had an hour conversation with my son, he said, my mom's tough as nails and she's going to be fine. And I walked out of there and I knew that I would live the rest of my life to prove that kid right.
Wow. Okay. That is amazing. I can remember that Andy was really big in baseball, and yes, he had someone with him and they were talking a lot of baseball stuff that they would have talked or did talk about in life. And so I really feel like sometimes the soul on the other side chooses the medium. They feel like there's something, they can relate to. And you've had other sessions over the years too.
How do you know, as this is my son, I am his mom, how do you know it's him? What happens inside of you, or what do you hear that makes you know I really have a connection here?
Well, I've had other readings with other mediums. I think there were a couple of things that were special. When I asked you right after the end of the first session, I said, so what do I do now, Susanne? How do I, do I come back? What do I, what's my next step? And it was so interesting to me that you said, no, you don't need to come back. You don't need me. And I thought at that moment, wow, okay, that not only did that really emphasize the legitimacy of the messaging that I had gotten from you, but it set me to search myself. How can I communicate with him myself? How do I open up those doors? And I know that at the very beginning, it's so difficult for newly grieving parents, or, whether it's a spouse, no matter what it is, you're just so heavy with that grief that it's hard for you to even open up that possibility that these signs, these communications that your loved ones are sending you, they're working so hard to send you, that they're really the truth. And, I knew that I gave myself permission to come and see you every 6 months for 2 years. And I called it my intergalactic conversations with my son. And it was just like I was talking to him, just like we would talk on a normal basis, having coffee or whatever. It wasn't difficult. It was easy. And that's how I knew I was talking with him.
Yeah, he's one of those few souls, the rare souls that, I have phrases that are sort of stored in my consciousness, like a database, and he can just punch a button and get a full sentence out. But I can remember there are other times, and I would write in my diary. I never write notes from a reading, but I write for me and for my own continuing development, something different that happened. I'm like, this kid can get full sentences through, his own sentences, not necessarily the ones that I hear all the time or the ones I have symbols for. And it's like, he's so super powerful. And it all comes down to the mission. There's a mission here, and you're on that mission now. But didn't you have to overcome a lot of stigma? I mean, isn't it hard enough, LeAnn, when somebody says, oh, you have kids? And you're going, you're about to answer the question. And then you say that there's maybe if you feel like it, I don't know, maybe you tell us what you say, but if you feel like saying, well, I've got one that lives in heaven, or one that passed, or however you say it, is there a stigma still with how people die? How do you answer how do you even handle that?
Being prepared. And I think you know me well enough to know that I like being in charge. So some of it's my own natural personality that just continued on this path. Regardless of what happens to me, my natural personality still comes out, and I wanted to be in charge. And so within a couple hours after Andy passed, and I walked in the bathroom to look in the mirror to reconcile that this had happened to me. And I said 2 things. I said, I will praise you in the storm, meaning that my faith would be a decision and not an emotion, and that I'm not the first mom to lose a kid. So as important as it was for me instantly, I didn't want any of Andy's friends to think that he didn't love them, that this was about them. So when they came over, within that first couple hours, I was just wanting them to know how much he loved them. And I recognized that when you lose a child or a loved one, I think our biggest fear is that people will forget about them. And so we want people to talk about our loved ones, but it's kind of scary. So what I understood was that in order to get rid of the fear, if I just owned the conversation right away. So this is what I teach, that when I teach a new parent, when you're getting ready to go out and you're going to meet someone new and you're going to just own that conversation. They're going to say, hi, how are you? How many kids do you have? And I say it right off the bat. I have 4 kids. I have 2 boys in the military, a daughter who's a nurse, and my youngest son, Andy, died by suicide when he was 16 years old. He was such an amazing kid. So right then and there, I just addressed the elephant in the room by talking about suicide. I own the conversation. They can tell by how I'm presenting it. They then know how to respond, and they don't have to be I don't have to be ashamed of my kid or of me. I want to share how Andy lived, not how he died. And I've just told them that by owning that conversation. So get rid of the fear, address it right away, and then it's over with. And then you can go on.
Yeah, it's almost like you don't want to lead with your chin, just make yourself all vulnerable. And when you say you own that conversation, it takes a little planning, takes a little effort, but it seems to me the smart way to go. What if I come back with you and say, oh, he committed suicide? How come? And believe me, listeners, there are idiots that say things like that. How do you handle that?
I've definitely heard it all. So, I mean, I hear everything about how and why and, so all of the blame factors. And you know what, depending upon who it is, if I feel like engaging in that conversation and going a little bit deeper, that it might be helpful for them, or they're asking for a reason that they have a need to know, then I'm going to discuss it with them. And I'm going to talk about, Andy's I talk about it as a brain malfunction. So my daughter has diabetes. Her pancreas doesn't work. At that moment when Andy died by suicide, his brain didn't work. It wasn't functioning fully, and especially at 16. But regardless of what age it is, it's a non-issue, and I can dispel that stigma right away just by even being willing to have that conversation. Hey, it was tragic. And do I wish Andy were here? Of course I do. The big question that I get from parents, they get stuck on the why. Why'd this happen to my kid? Why did my kid?
Listen, LeAnn, I get that question all the time too. Then when people want to know why, that I talk a little bit about free will, but to me, my finding has been that there also was an opportunity, as a soul, there was an exit point around that time, or it couldn't have been completed. Like it may have been, a car accident or something like that. What do you say when people say, was it planned before he was born? Could it have been? There are people that say it's always part of a plan when it happens. I even saw a spiritual teacher put up an ad on social media saying, is suicide part of your soul plan? And I just cringed because I don't think we want to encourage that. You're the antithesis of that. But how do you answer that question of why? Where do you start? I know you can't just throw your own big spiritual truths right away. How do you develop that conversation?
The easiest thing for me, and I do get a lot of pushback because I don't believe in that Andy planned this or that I planned this. I don't believe that. But the bigger issue for me is, instead of why not me? Why did I think that my life, why would somebody's 5-year-old little child die with leukemia? Or why in the Ukraine and India, all the poverty in the world? I mean, there's so much. Why would I think that I could go through life unscathed? Why not me? Am I not prepared to handle this? Is life. And it is full of ups and downs, and that's how we experience joy and sorrow. And so I just leave it at the why not, because let's just say that you ask God why, or universe, or whomever your person is, and God says, and this is why I did this. Well, did that make me feel any better now that I know why?
Oh, right.
So it doesn't matter.
There's no value.
No, it's a non-issue. It's torturous. So I'm very, again, factual and controlling, I guess, even in my thought process of what I'm going to allow in and what I'm going to process. And that's not something that's worth my time.
Well, you've even said asking why is masochistic.
It is.
Right. So it's sort of like torturing yourself, because the implication is you could have stopped it. And we know from 200 years of spirits connecting with us through reliable mediums, through afterlife research, that freight train cannot be stopped by anyone once it leaves the station. What do you think about that?
I have a lot of my friends, I would say the majority of the people, my friends who've lost kids, they find comfort in a soul plan. They find comfort in believing that there was a master plan and that their child or their loved one had decided in advance that this is how it's going to, and that's fine. If that provides them comfort and helps them to move forward, I don't need to argue it because I don't need to prove it. I don't need to dispel their process or prove mine because it's just not important in my being able to do what I'm here to do, which is honor Andy and make an impact on other people's lives.
And I agree with that. And I also feel like, again, the suicide wouldn't have been completed unless that soul was leaving. That's been my finding. And I'm open to modifying it as evidence comes in. But man, over 30 years of talking with spirits, and they just say, one time I tried it and I'm glad it didn't work, but then I got to the other side and I found out I didn't have an exit point around then. So who knows? We will know when we get to the other side.
Right.
What's important is what is helpful, hopeful, and healing to you now. And what is healing from the loss of a close loved one? What does that look like? If, I've had people who've come from very, very close relationships and saying, why didn't I die too? Susanne, why can't I die of a broken heart? My heart is broken. I've heard that's a thing. I want to go too. And you write about how to keep living when you just don't really want to live anymore. What does healing look like? How do you recommend healing grief? Wow, that's a huge question to lay on you, isn't it?
It is a big question. And of course, everybody has their own different process. As long as you're seeking ways to move forward. I find that so many people just sort of succumb to that grief because they're not able to separate grief from their loved one. And they feel like if they let go of grief, somehow they're going to dishonor their loved one and it'll disconnect them. Someone that other people will say, and Lord knows, I've heard people tell me, well, you just didn't love your child as much as I loved mine because you're living a joyful life, which is the most ridiculous thing they could ever say.
Really? Send them to me. I'll take care of them for you.
Oh my gosh. But it's a process that you have to go through. You do have to grieve. I don't know how long that looks like for each person. It could be a month. For me, it really was a couple of years of heavy grieving. And part of that was my unraveling some of my religious indoctrination. I had to unravel some of that to allow more of the spiritual healing and come to a place where I could find a balance of spiritual and religious. I needed both. They were important. Both were important to me. I wasn't ready to let go of the religious foundation just because I had incorporated and found some new spiritual information. And so, but all through that 2 years, I was busy. So, I read 80 books that very first year after Andy passed. I went to every Helping Parents Heal meeting I could get to every month. I watched videos online. I read, I watched I controlled the music that I listened to so that I hear parents that tell me, oh, that song just makes me so sad. I just sit and cry and I just want to smack them. Stop listening to the song. Don't do things that reinforce that sadness. I was intentional about every decision I made, even though I didn't necessarily see the results. It's kind of like going to the gym. If we could walk into the gym and come back out and be this new specimen, wouldn't that be wonderful? But that's not the reality. We have to put in the work. It's same with our mental healing, and maybe even the mental healing more than the physical, because there's so many other variables that affect that. But I put in the work, and then I remember that time when I felt like the clouds had parted and the grief was lifting, and I had to be intentional about my speech. If you read so many of the online posts from people that have lost loved ones, they'll say, it never gets better. It never gets better. Well, no, it won't. As long as you keep saying it, it'll never get better.
Oh, interesting. So that's reinforcing an intention of staying at a certain place in the grief instead of continuing to walk.
It's scary to leave the grief. I get that. I remember that moment when someone asked me, how are you? And I said, I'm fine. I didn't feel like I was fine, but I knew that if I ever wanted to be fine, I had to begin to believe that that was possible. And that began here by my speaking it into existence. I am fine. I am fine. Andy's fine.
Did you have to force yourself to want more out of life, to want more
Yes.
than just a robotic walk through life?
Yes.
Where did that come from in you, LeAnn Hull?
Like I said, some of it's obviously nature. I was raised as an only child. My mom was a single parent, so I spent a lot of time alone. I'm an independent person. That's probably my core personality, that I recognized I have to do stuff on my own. No one's going to knock on your door and say, here I am to fix you. You have to fix yourself.
And it's not dishonoring your loved one on the other side of life to enjoy life and to keep living, right? They're right there with you. Do you feel them a lot with you? And when do you feel them?
Well, I talk to him a lot, so I'm sure, I don't know, I'm just comfortable with where he's at. That's a strange thing to say. I don't feel that ache in my gut anymore. I am not grieving anymore. And I never thought that would happen. People will tell you that grief is a lifelong process. I do not believe that. I just finished a course. I'm a certified grief educator now. And that course teaches you that grief is forever. There has to be an exit point.
Okay, so you found an off-ramp. Is it through leading a foundation? And tell us about the foundation, if you would.
I'm sure that helped, because when we can take our eyes off ourselves and our own misery and focus on someone else, it gives us a place to take our grief, to use it. It's like energy. Grief is a lot of energy. So you can either let it destroy you, or you can power up that energy and direct it somewhere. I always tell people, imagine your loved one. If the tables were turned and they were here and you were in heaven, would you want them to be living the way you are right now? Would you, because are you living a sad, pathetic life? Is that how you'd want your loved one to be living if you were in heaven? Or would you want them to be joyful, getting everything they possibly can out of life while you have this experience? So do that flip-flop and just picture that. And can I be proud of where I'm at right now? Is Andy proud of me? Am I living every day, since he's not here in the physical? I want to make darn sure that I'm living every stinking moment that I can for this gift of life, if only to honor him.
Did you have this much gratitude before Andy went to the other side of life, or did you find more gratitude in life throughout this process?
Yeah, I'm a totally different person. I mean, I was always a driven type person. I owned a business for 28 years, so you can't run a
You're
business.
still a driven type person.
Yes.
But what about the gratitude? Where is that coming from? Was it in you already, do you believe? Probably
some level of teachings were there, if probably from my religious background. So that's a thankful. You get a lot of indoctrination of being thankful there. So that was natural, just like my making that statement, I will praise you in the storm. It's a decision to be grateful, even today. So it's 10 years after Andy passed, and there are crummy days. It doesn't mean that I'm grieving, but there are crummy days. So differentiate between the fact that just because you have a yucky day or that you're sad doesn't mean that you've slipped back into grief. We live in the world.
Well, that gave me chills when you said that. I will praise you in the storm, because it's celebrating life.
Yes.
And it's a visceral celebration of life, in its sorrows and its sweetness. What is the foundation up to? What projects are you guys working on, and how have you been able to see impacts? And have you had some experience with legislatures and that sort of thing? Because I know you're a big agenda person, but you're also not just strategic, but you know how to rally people around and get those tactics done for the betterment of all. So share some of that stuff with us. It's great.
We were a lot busier before COVID. COVID had an impact on us, just like it did everything else. But we have worked on legislation. We enacted two bills into law after Andy passed, regarding suicide and suicide education being mandatory in the schools. So I've worked really hard on that, and that's been I'm really proud of that. The foundation does that. Plus, we ship You Matter wristbands all over the world. All anybody has to do is log on to our website and request a wristband. We've shipped 18,000 back to a school district in New York this summer for every child in a New York school district. I have people that ask, can I just have one? And they just want one. So I get lots and lots of letters. I love the letters that I get telling me why they want the You Matter wristbands, who they want to give them to, how they're using them in schools. I've spoken on many schools, military bases, churches, businesses. I love that. And we have a Camp You Matter. And our Camp You Matter is a curriculum for students ages 3rd to 6th grade. And it's an outdoor wilderness inside the school. So like through an after school project. And it's a powerful message. We as humans, as kids, we either get a deposit every day or we get a withdrawal. So our Camp You Matter is intentionally making deposits into these kids' lives, positive messaging, and teaching them how to give positive messaging as well as insulate themselves from the negativity. So it's all set in a camp setting, and I love that. I love what we do with Camp You Matter.
I know Andy's got to just really be jazzed about being at those, because he was so outgoing and so loved. I actually saw someone just last fall who said, do you know Andy Hull? Because I know you know LeAnn. And it was just like a question, like, he's on the other side and they're asking, do I know him, in the present tense? And I thought that was so great. And that's the kind of education that you're doing, is you matter, you matter, you matter, you always matter. You have a comment here from one of the attendees. My Carefree Souls community attends in our studio audience for those who are watching or listening to the recording. And she says, my husband died by suicide. I also was up front from the beginning. I was asked if suicide should be in his obituary, and said yes, because she wanted to educate everyone that the last person in the world you may think wouldn't die by suicide may do so, because we need to understand the signs, or sometimes the lack of obvious signs. And that's a wonderful, wonderful comment. And I thank her for that. When you are speaking to groups, what do you advise them to look for in someone who may be at risk?
There's some really obvious signs. And like Andy didn't have the obvious signs. He was the happy kid. His nickname was Sunshine. So there were other factors that came into play. And one of them was a prescription drug that interacted with his brain. And I signed the waiver that said suicide, psychosis, depression are potential side effects. So I encourage people to really look at the side effects from any of the prescriptions, any of the drugs they might be taking. So that's a starter point. If you see someone that is suddenly isolating from their group of friends, if they are in retreat mode, if their dress habits change, if you suddenly start to see them in clothing that is sullen and dark, if they start to give their objects that they love away. Maybe Andy gave away his Xbox. Never even crossed my mind. He gave his Xbox away a few days before he passed. That would have been a sign. It's hard, especially with kids. Well, with anybody. You can hear this from anybody. It's really hard because it's such a private turmoil that's going on in their heads. And it's not something, gosh, if they'd come out and talk about it, then wouldn't that be wonderful? We could all talk about it, but typically they don't. So I always tell people to err on the side of caution. If you are concerned, put the friend before the friendship. Get help for them, even if they don't want it. I've called 911 on a few people that I've been talking to on the phone or online, because I'm not going to take that chance. I want to be responsible for missing something, missing a sign, even though I'm pretty much they'll tell you, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. And the reality is they're not, because it's hard. And that's why the title of my book, How to Live When You Want to Die, I didn't understand that point until I had reached that point and walked up to the edge myself and understood what that looked like and how really difficult it is to ask for help when you're in a moment of crises. So if you don't have some safety nets in place, I did. I had a lot of safety nets in place, which is what helped me. But also recognizing that and being able to walk up to that moment and then go, okay, now I have some decisions that I can make about where I'm going to go next. Even though I may not feel any different, I know that these coping tools are bridges to help to take me over to another place where I can make a different decision, because over here, I don't want to live. And so I've got to take this bridge over to here where I can look at that and go, okay. And so maybe it's calling a friend. Maybe it's just a walk around. I had a girlfriend, she called me and she was not wanting to be here on the planet anymore. And I said, while we're talking, I want you to just walk around the block and we're going to keep talking. And by the time she finished walking around the block, that was enough to change the chemistry. It creates endorphins. Being outside and physical activity begins to change your chemistry in your body. It didn't fix her, but it put her in a different place where then she would be more receptive to help.
Well, I can see why you're going to be starting up a podcast. Can you tell us about that? Because you do have a lot to share.
Yes, it's called Dare to Hope, and I am the hope maker. I really like that. I want to give. Gosh, if I could just give, I wish I could give some of my hope, and that's what I want to do. Some of what I've got, this joie de vivre, because Andy had that joie de vivre, and I want you to have that. I want to share some of that. So let me teach some of the things that I've been able to do and help you to practice. It's going to take practice, patience, and persistence. The 3 Ps, they're super important, that you have to be patient through your process. I don't want to leave without talking about clay though, too.
Well, yeah. And this is really tough because when your husband passed not long ago, you had just had the most beautiful evening of family gathered together, celebrating your wedding anniversary. You had posted a beautiful video of the two of you dancing. It was so romantic. And I can't think of a happier moment. And then the next day, tell us about that.
Well, and it was our 40th anniversary. So we've been together 45 years, long time. And when about 1 o'clock in the morning, I woke up to a loud yell, not a scream. I reached over to see if Clay was in bed and he wasn't there. And so I got up, I walked and looked, he was standing in the bathroom. At least I thought he was standing in the bathroom. And I said, "Are you okay?" And he said, "I'm fine." And so I went back to bed, got up the next morning, and I saw him. It was dark still. I get up early. He was sitting in the chair in the living room, upright, legs on the coffee table, just sitting there. And I walked around and kissed him, and I knew he had passed. And it was so shocking, just like Andy leaving. It was just like, oh, what do you mean? He's 1 minute he's here and the next minute he's gone. And you reached out to me that afternoon because I then posted on Facebook because everybody had seen the dance that my husband and I had done. And so I tried to let everybody know what had happened. And you called me and you said, "LeAnn, I don't do readings for newly grieved people because they're cuckoo."
Pretty much. Yeah.
And it's tough to do one for a newly grieved. But she said, your loved ones want to talk to you. Can I give you a reading on Wednesday? This was Sunday. And so, yes, I was excited that the first thing you said is Clay was standing there and he's got a bullhorn and he's yelling as loud as he could, to wake you up to say goodbye. And I was like, I hadn't told anybody that.
This is the first time I'm hearing this.
And I knew that wasn't his physical body in the bathroom. That was his apparition. He'd already left. And he had woken me up to say goodbye. And he was telling me, "I'm fine."
Good. I love to hear this.
It's amazing.
This is so good. This is so good because you deserve that. You deserve that goodbye. And I know there are people listening to this going, why couldn't I get one last goodbye? They'll do it from spirit. If they can't do it from here, they'll find some sign or symbol or dream visit. But so Clay was so proud of you. Your husband was so damn proud of his family, everybody, and your accomplishments and the work that you were doing. Do you feel he's part of the project now in a different way?
I'm still a work in progress where that comes. Yeah, I used to say, and all my girlfriends used to say the same thing, there's nothing worse than losing a child. And I would tell you that losing my husband has been more difficult for me than losing Andy, because we expect our children to go on with their lives, and they are leaving us. They're just not leaving the planet, but they're going on with their lives where we like, you understand that loss of identity. You've been married for so long, and suddenly you're not
grow old together, right? And you'll have all these memories and reminisce, and you were truly partners, truly life partners.
I tell people who have experienced a divorce is harder than my losing my husband to death, because a divorce, there are many things that we experience in life that are rejection, and that definitely feels that way. And those are really hard to reconcile. Suicide can feel like that to a certain extent, a rejection. I know a lot of parents that feel like that, abandoned by their children, or a spouse abandoned by their spouse. But it's just all in the way you spin the story in your head. And you know that we have to spin it in a way that's going to propel us forward. Certainly, I could come up with a lot of narrative that's not going to be helpful for me. And it doesn't help Clay or Andy in spirit for sure. So there's no point in me spinning that negative story.
No. I mean, again, that's the antithesis of who you are. You're a role model, and you're demonstrating what we came here to do, which is to have experiences, have feelings, the emotions connected with those feelings, process them, integrate them, and that creates the wisdom. But it can be so hard. And I've got a question for you that one of the Carefree Souls, my community group, sent in. And it goes back to the teens that die by suicide. He wants to know, is this a true statement that suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem? And because children think in terms of right now, they're more apt to die by suicide. Is that correct? And can you say more about that? I think it can help a lot of people.
Yeah, I think it is correct for our teens. It's also becoming more correct for adults, because we don't have any positive messaging coming in. My grandson recently said to me, my grandson's 15, he's almost 16. And he said to me, I don't really want to be here, Grandma. And, we've been very open about the conversation about Andy. We talk about suicide, and they've grown up listening to this. And I said, based on what information? I asked him, and he said, the world's a really yucky place. Let's just look at all that's going on in the world, in China, and all the problems that we have. And I said, so Raiden, what you're telling me is that that's all the messaging that you're getting in, is this negative messaging. I said, you have to be intentional about some positive. I get Wayne Dyer. I get quotes from him and Anne Graham and whatever, so that I'm intentional about bringing in things that are going to offset the negative. And for kids, you have to be a parent that's being intentional about messaging that to the kids. And I love talking to parents of teens, because I tell them, what are your teens seeing you do? What do you do when you have a bad day at work? How do you cope with it? Because your kids are watching. So do you come home?
Wow, that's big. That's big, right? Are you self-medicating? Are you over shopping? what are you role modeling?
Are you messaging bad things on social media? Are you watching bad things? Because your kids are watching everything you do. So if we want to make a difference in our teens' lives, because they can't think that long term yet, they're going to look at their immediate role models and what information is coming into them. So we have to find sources that are bringing in those, like our Camp You Matter, that's intentionally making good deposits in their life. As a parent, you have to make good deposits and be very open about having the conversations, because they can't think long-term. Frankly, most adults can't think long-term anymore. They have no hope. They have no goals. They don't know how to set goals. So what are your short-term goals? What are your long-term goals? It's what I'm doing with my grandson. Let's go paintballing. That's a short-term goal. So I'm helping him to maybe see 30 days out past whatever he's experiencing right now. So he's got a short-term goal, and then graduation. He wants to go to Japan. Okay, so let's start Googling and looking up some information so that he has some hope, some visual hope about where he could go and what he could do.
Oh, and that's good for grown-ups too. I was just talking very recently to a very dear friend who said, I went to bed the other night and I felt so beaten down. I just prayed to God and said, it's okay to take me tonight. I'm healthy, but you can take me tonight if you want to. And then in the morning, my friend felt like, hey, I don't feel like that anymore. I want to live. I'm going to plan something fun. And I did. And so, we can learn from that too. But you can be the best role model in the world and still have a loved one die by suicide. My last question for you is this. How do we value ourselves more so that we can communicate that value to others, because we're all connected? So as you said, if we're on social media arguing politics with a bot most of the time, not even a real person, but somebody that, wants to, color the narrative, if we're doing those kinds of things, we're starting to devalue ourselves. What can an individual do right now to help lift everyone around them in your viewpoint?
I do believe that we have a sense of responsibility here. I don't believe we're just blobs here. And so beginning to recognize first and ask yourself that question. Why am I here? It sounds so existential, I know, but why am I here? What can I contribute? And I always ask, what would you like your memorial to say about you? What are people going to say about you?
Ooh, that's good. What do you want it to say? Because you really can't control that once you're on the other side. So it's really asking you, what do you want to, what's your legacy?
What's
right?
your legacy? What are you doing every day
Okay.
that's going to make a difference in someone else's life? And in that process of making a difference, it makes a difference. I mean, I get goosebumps just thinking about it right now. I get fired up to inspire people. That changes. I could be in a deep and dark place. And if I can go, and I think almost everybody, if you had the opportunity, if you saw someone disabled or someone fell down or someone was hurt, even if you were in a moment of despair, you'd probably stop and go help that person, because that's how we were created. We were created for community. We're created to help. That's where we began, and we've just gotten lost along the way. And so if you can just look at your life every day, what's a simple little thing that you can do for someone else? Because that in the long run shows the value, what you think of yourself. It's what you have to offer. What can you offer?
As long as you know and trust that you matter, right?
Yeah. And it's not based, so I don't want people to think that you matter is based on what you do, because your mere existence is enough. You were created, that's enough. You matter just because of that. I don't know what your life plan is like. Maybe it's not going to be. I used to tell my mom, because she used to say this to me, I just don't feel like I have a purpose anymore. And my mom was a very strong, powerful woman. And I said, Mom, isn't it enough that you're my mom and you're my kid's grandma? Isn't that enough? We need life to be enough. The fact that we exist to be enough. We exist, and
we need
therefore
to
you
tell our
matter.
loved ones, we can tell our loved ones, I need you, you matter.
Yes.
Needing someone doesn't mean you need them to do something for you. You need them to be.
Yeah, it's definitely a hard topic to talk about.
I know.
It's so heavy. People are so resistant to it. And that's why, I really wanted to kind of shift my message from being focused on suicide to creating hope for people, because people will say, well, I'm not suicidal. You may not be suicidal, but you're not living your full life either. And why is that? What can we do about that? So I just had lunch with my aunt. She's in her late 80s, and she's not real happy at the moment. So she's not happy with the world. She's not happy with her physical body, but I'm trying to create something for her still here, that there's value for her. I want her to know that she's important for me, and I have to show up, but I recognize she's not suicidal. She's just unhappy. So what can we do about that? You may be just depressed or lost and looking to find your way. And it begins with you. It begins with you taking an action. Get a book, watch a video. I didn't watch shows that triggered me. Even the Hallmark Channel after Andy passed was too much for me, because the Hallmark Channel it always falls apart before it all gets better. I couldn't go through that process because I was already there. I was already where everything was falling apart. So I was intentional about monitoring what shows. I watched the Ellen Show because I knew that her show was predictable, and you may not like Ellen, watch whatever you want. Everybody Loves Raymond. I don't know, whatever it is, but something that's predictable and is positive, and the messaging's positive. Saturday Night Live, things that make you laugh. I need more cowbell for those people that are at the same age as me.
That's great. Yeah. So know your limits and know what lifts the boat for you.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Same with the radio. I didn't just jump into my truck and leave it to random chance of what song would come on. I had a playlist that I would put on for several years that I knew I needed to hear. I'm a Champion. Those by Carrie Underwood. That's the kind of music I listen to. I am a champion.
And if that song had made you cry and blow snot bubbles,
not listening to it.
Okay. All right. So there are days where we really want to reminisce. We want to look at the old pictures, but don't stay there too long unless you're smiling with that, right? This is all great information. The book is How to Live When You Want to Die. And the foundation website, can you tell us?
It's www.andyssunshine.com. 2 S's in the middle, andyssunshine.com.
And I'll link it below for those who are watching this on YouTube. LeAnn Hull, thank you.
Thanks, Susanne. Love you.
I love you.